So Renwar, you can, if you have time, you can just copy the link from my YouTube and then paste on the Facebook page. Otherwise, I cannot do much other than that.
I'll.
Yeah, so we will start now. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. And thank you all for joining us this evening. And this is, as you know, this is the first webinar of the Kurdistan Times. Kurdistan Times is an independent platform. So a group of Kurdish journalists, academics, political analysts have started this small website for almost about a year. And we focus on Iraq, Kurdistan region, and the wider region. So this evening we will discuss the political reality of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, the protests and youth mobilization, the KRG's relations with Baghdad, and the transnational Kurdish politics. Before we begin, I want to provide a short overview of the developments since the formation of the current cabinet. That was formed following the 2018 Kurdistan region elections. I'll try to avoid repeating the crisis the KRG has had ever since its foundation. To name a few: family rule, militia forces, the politicization of police and Asaish, corruption issues of the disputed areas, KRG's bad record of human rights and freedom of expression, unemployment, monopoly of the market, corruption in the oil and gas sector, smuggling in the border points, privatization on the expense of the poor people and public sector, and of course, lack of the public services, just to name a few. As you know, in July 2019, Prime Minister Barzani was officially sworn in, and he said a beginning to establish a strong Kurdistan has started. And he said, quote, "My top objective is to combat corruption and carry out reforms." So here I want to discuss this, which was top of Barzani's objective and the essence of the cabinet formation agreement. Masroor Barzani started with a strong campaign. He showed a sort of vision when his predecessors did not bother to have one. He comes from an intelligence background, and the problem is that landed his cabinet were inherited from his cousin, Nechirvan Barzani, and his father, Masroor Barzani. Masroor Barzani and his PR machinery promoted the narrative that he was anti-corruption and that he would change the future of Kurdistan region for better. And he wanted to establish, quote, a strong Kurdistan. The first thing he did upon becoming prime minister was to pursue a reform package, which was passed by the Kurdistan parliament, but it has not been implemented. So basically the package, the law should have been enacted since July 2020, but it has not been completed. So there are a lot of problems with this. So the problems that we face in the Kurdistan region are both systematic and institutional. In order to reform to be implemented, there must be a mechanism for it. In Kurdistan, we have two institutions, the Integrity Commission and the Finance Monitoring of the Finance Ministry. Both of these institutions have had the terms of their heads expired, and the Kurdistan government has not fixed this. How can reforms take place when the two main leading institutions that are supposed to pursuing reform do not have legitimate legal terms? Meanwhile, our judiciary system is hugely politicized. So the judges are being divided between the KDP and PUK 50-50. One of the primary institutions in any democratic society is parliament. This is where the people's representatives hold those in power to account. However, in Kurdistan, we do not see parliament fulfill its obligations. The prime minister and his ministers do not answer to members of parliament in parliament, and they have rejected to attend questioning sessions that the parliament have officially requested. So take for example, over 80% of Kurdistan's budget comes from oil and gas revenues. The Prime Minister has not appointed a minister for natural resources. Ashti Hawrami, who faces allegations of gross corruption, remains de facto minister without actually being in the ministry itself. The KRG hasn't submitted the budget law neither in 2019 nor in 2020. And as you know, the KRG historically has failed to submit budget laws other than 2 years between 2011 to 2013. In addition to this, transparency in oil revenues and expenditure is completely absent. This means when you do not have an opposition party and you do not have a parliament that functions, and the free media has already been undermined and the journalists are being arrested and persecuted, how can promises of reform are being met? So promise of reforms simply will remain imaginary. And how can reforms take place in this context? So I will go to a few other comments, a few pointers that the KRG has failed to bring about. So first, both Prime Minister and his Deputy Prime Minister, as well as the change movement during the election campaigns, they promised that they will bring jobs to the youth. As you know, there's a huge unemployment in the Kurdistan region. So, however, both have failed to create any jobs, and they might excuse themselves with the pandemic. However, the pandemic basically is not the main reason. And in the meantime, we did have a kind of opposition party prior, back in 2019. Now we are also lack of a strong position. And so we also did have a kind of difference between the KDP and PUK. Somehow the PUK would, because of their social democratic history, they were trying to pressure for reforms. However, the PUK is hugely divided and is further going to the path of the PUK has gone thus far. And we also did have the change movement back in 2019, but after the change founder, leader, Nowshera Mustafa died, and now we do have a kind of change movement, which is not much different from the traditional political party that we have had. And so one of the main promises that both Prime Minister and his deputy have made during the election campaigns was also diversifying the economy. However, the economy remains very much dependent on oil, and the rhetoric of diversification of the economy remains the same. So I will not further go into the issues in the Kurdistan region and also maybe solutions. We have today 4 speakers for and 1 journalist, 2 academics, and also a politician, where they will further dig into the issues in the Kurdistan region and Iraq we have. So first we will go to Renwar Najm, who will discuss the main characteristics of the December protests in the Kurdistan region. As you know, we did have protests that Renwar will further discuss. So I will hand over mic to Renwar. Renwar is a Slemani-based journalist, and he's doing his master at the Kent University at the School of Politics and International Relations. Mic is yours, Renwar.
Thank you, Kamal, and thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to all our friends who are joining us tonight for this discussion. So I wanted to highlight some of the characteristics of recent protests in Kurdistan region. As most of you probably know, that the recent wave of protests erupted on the 2nd of December and cracked down by security forces after 10 days. Overall, 7 protesters and 2 from security forces were killed and many more injured. So first of all, I believe that December protests was not an isolated event. Rather, I believe that it was the extension of all forms of demonstrations and protests in the last decade in Kurdistan region. I can say that the first radical step of this anti-KRG movement was from back to February 2011 demonstrations. Ever since, what we have is the extension of this radical and powerful movement. In 2011, Kurdish people took to the streets for exactly 62 days. The KRG has failed to address people's grievance and frustrations. But the PUK and the KDP clamping down on protests by using force and militarizing all the cities and towns as usual. However, the people's living condition has been deteriorating significantly over the past decade. After the 2011 demonstrations. So, every now and then protests emerged. Some for specific demands, such as, for example, asking salaries to be paid on time and in full, and others for a more radical reform. But the ruling parties, the KDP and the PUK mainly, always have chosen to suppress the protests. Back into December protests, one of the most controversial questions was about the identity of the protesters. Okay, that's okay. I was saying that the question over the identity of the protesters, who were they and what was their background. I believe that the December protesters were like explicitly youth, even teenagers, anger toward the ruling elite in the Kurdistan region. On the other hand, the other believe that the protesters were far more widespread to be limited in one particular society layer. Well, I believe that both arguments are true to some extent. It is true that people from all different ages, from different layers of society, even different genders, are angry at ruling parties, and they are trying to find a way to express their anger. However, when the government does not allow any kind of peaceful demonstrations, rather it uses violent means, such as, for example, tear gas and live bullet and so on, to disperse any attempt to protest. Simply, people like pensioners, like old-aged people cannot resist. But the younger generation can resist, can remain on the street. They have enough energy to stay on the street despite the brutality of the government. I believe this is one of the main reasons. That's why we mostly saw the youth on the street in December. And at the end of the day, the young people who are remained on the street are shaping the December protests. No one else. In short, I wanted to say that most of the people, whether they are KRG employees or not, whether they are old or young, are angry at KRG and wanted to find a way to protest. Also, I wanted to mention that this wave of protests is beyond the demand of salary. So it's true that the economic situation might be among the major reasons for people protesting, but it's not the only reason. And the people, especially the youth, will not calm down by for example, reaching an agreement between Erbil and Baghdad. or like fixing salaries. So I believe the main aim of this movement is to end the unbearable injustice and corruption in Kurdistan. And it's always true that to say that inequality, fosters fosters like protests and so on. Another characteristics of this movement is using violence. Even though, I do believe that that's all what governments are much more violent compared to the protesters. Apart from physical violence, for example, starving people is violence. Injustice is violence. Silencing people is violence. But we all think that throwing some stones by the protesters at the police or setting fires on some buildings are violent acts by protesters. Anyway, so we have to bear in mind that all the democratic and peaceful means of have been tried out in the last decade. For instance, peaceful demonstrations, strike, marching, closing governmental institutions such as schools, even hospitals for a very short period, and recently online activism. Literally every way that one can think about have been tried out to make pressure on the government, but none of them worked with the KRG. So the unheard people in Kurdistan tried another way to be heard, which was using symbolic violence. Let's not forget that all the violence December protesters used was symbolic. To a great extent, they tried not to hurt anyone, but like burning down some buildings belonging to the political parties and government, which these buildings brought nothing to them but misery and corruption. However, this is a very, very important point. There is no guarantee that the violence of the future protesters only remains as symbolic. It might go even further because, in the last 10 years, protesters became more violent and destructive one after another. The more people remain unheard, the more destructive they become. This is a conclusion from the last 10 years of our experience. The last point, I know I'm running out of time. So the last point I want to make is about the future of protesters in Kurdistan. So in political science, there is a concept that I believe describes the current situation in Kurdistan the best, which is called a negative peace. It means that our society may appear quiet and peaceful, not because people are satisfied with the political status quo, but because people are afraid to challenge the state and suffer the consequences. We all know that the KDP and the PUK militants do not hesitate to use any means of violence against anyone who challenges their power. So for now, people would stay calm until they find another opportunity to take to the streets again, because there are always plenty of reasons out there for people to protest. But the next time the protests might be uncontrollable, even through violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Renwar, for your analysis and the information you shared with us. You were one of the journalists who covered the protests at the time that there was a kind of ban on the protests to cover in local in international media in English. So thanks a lot, and please remain with us and
of course,
for the QA session afterward. So our second speaker will be Dastan Jasim, who will discuss the youth mobilization and protests. So for many, Dastan is known, but for those who is not known, for them, Dastan is a doctoral candidate at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies and researches Kurdish political culture in Kurdistan and the diaspora. She will also, the topic she is discussing here, I think most probably will be published in a, in a book chapter. So Dastan, mic is yours. Yeah, just a minute, because I think you need to.
Okay, I think, yes, I cannot unmute myself. So thank you very much for inviting me to this great panel. And I think this, just the fact that we're discussing this and that we're taking the room to talk about this, especially in English, is very important. As you said, there is a lot of efforts to silence this issue, and the more important it is that we're doing this right now. You talked about the chapter. So yes, I wrote a chapter on especially the difference between the political socialization of Kurdish youth and Iraqi Arab youth in Iraq. I wrote this 3 months ago, when we were in a situation of negative peace, as Renwar said. So, and that's something that I talked about, and that's a very important point. Is I think it's really important that we look at this protest over time, and we also look at this protest from different levels. So I think it's neither enough to look at it from the top down, nor is it enough to just look at very, very specific little groups. So when we look at this specific generation that was on the streets right now, then we see a lot of them are considered to be the so-called Generation Z. And these are people that were even kids when the Goran movement was founded. So these are people that have not even been in the age of understanding politics very much when this oppositional movement started on. So we see a whole new movement going on, and we see a whole new ideology going on that is happening. So the issue is, as Renwar already said, the problem with a lot of the protests that happened in the last 10 years was that they were really issue-based. So, and even in this case, the first protests that started were the teachers that were protesting because they didn't get their salaries and so on. But the generation that is now protesting more and more is a generation that is not even included in the system. They don't even have a salary to fight for. They don't even have a job to fight for. They don't even have an income to ask for. And that's the thing. And it's also very interesting that it's in the periphery of the city. These are young people that have the mobility to be in contact with the bigger cities of Kurdistan, but they are in the more socially and economically deprived outskirts of the city and the more outside area of the Kurdistan region. And I think that's really important to consider. And it's important also to consider that these people have more agency than people think they have. One narrative that has been going around a lot is that these are young people that are, well, often the state media said these are young people that are motivated or they are recruited by the PKK. Well, the issue is, and that's where I try to get into the micro level of analysis, is no matter how young people are, they are able to watch the news and they're able to understand the situation. They're able to understand economics and they're able to understand politics. They don't need us to explain it to them. We're trying to explain this to more of the West or Europe. They see the situation and they know that the Kurdish people overall are in a world political situation where everything is done to oppress not only Kurdish people as Kurdish people, but especially the Kurdish working class and the Kurdish women. That is a very important point. And this is something that you have to consider very much at this point. So when people say, well, this is something that is provoked by the PKK or something like this, you have to consider, well, there is parallel to this economic fighting going on, there is a bigger political conflict going on. And we cannot talk about the shortcomings of the Kurdistan region and their economics without talking about the huge impact that Turkey has on the economy in Kurdistan region, and the fact that Turkey is selling their surplus produce as much as Iran does to the Kurdistan region. So Kurdistan region cannot even have an economy for themselves. They cannot even have a production for themselves. They are economically dependent on these countries, and they are in a military war. So as Renwar said, yes, economy is not the only point, but I would say a materialist analysis, very important to understand why people are doing what they're doing right now and why it's this young generation that it's doing it right now. The only problem that is going on right now is, how is this going to continue? The issue is that when the protests were going on in 2011, you had the Goran movement, and the Goran movement was an oppositional movement. You had some political structure that people were investing in. You had a group of people that you could vote for. You had some kind of political institutional structure that you can get in. That is not even a given anymore. And the problem is that it's not only negative peace, but it's also negative protest. It's often clear what people are against, but it's not clear what they are for. And it's also not clear what will come after this. Even if this government is at some point going to be toppled, who is going to be there after them? And who is even going to allow them to be toppled? And that's something that people ask themselves very much. So I think the negative piece is also having a lot to do with a wider political situation where there's a lot of pressure on any kind of Kurdish self-determination, whether it's in South Kurdistan, or it's in Rojava, or it's in Bakur, or it's in Rojhelat. And that's really something that we have to look at this overall point. And the last thing that I just want to say in this is, we also have to think about how to be able to channel these voices. Because one thing I found was that, I mean, a lot of the people that had an important say in the 2011 movement were all political people that, you know, are from the older generation. They are from the people that have seen the political movements in the 80s and 90s and stuff, so on. And they are people that publish and that are in some bigger discussion. But what we're seeing right now is a very, very micro level protest. And I think overall, a question that we have to ask ourselves, especially as academics, is how we can access these fields and how we can ask these people what is going on and how we can get more of a glimpse of that. And I think people like Renwar are doing an amazing job and doing that against all odds. Yeah, although we are not the people that have the big media companies in Kurdistan region, we can try to do something ourselves. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dastan, for your analysis. And, you know, it's very interesting. You mentioned a lot of analysis that hopefully we can get back to later, especially, you know, with regard to the, you know, this time is not the center that is protesting, it's rather the peripheries. And it was somehow the same with the Iraqi process as well. It starts from the south, from the other, you know, from the very low class. And also you mentioned you mentioned that Z generation. It's very interesting that we have neither the politicians nor the media, neither the members of parliament or the academia have talked to them, and they are completely disregarding them. And we saw that even from the statements from the government and from the political parties, they even didn't mention them. No one has met them so far. So it will be interesting to come back afterwards. And so now let's go to Sarkam Shamsaddin, who will be discussing about Baghdad-Arab relations and beyond budget issues. So Sarkam is a member of parliament, of the Iraqi parliament. Also is a ranking member of the Strategic Planning and Observing Government Program. So Sarkam, mic is yours, and so please provide us with your analysis with regard to the KRG and Baghdad relation, especially, many right now are talking about that it's all the issues are all related to one side of the government, or that are more about the payments and the budget cut. And I saw you recently tweeted something that with regard to the problem, it's not only the issue of payments or budget cuts, rather a problem that both governments have. None of them have a policy to Baghdad or to the Kurdistan region. So Mike is yours, please.
Okay. Thank you. Come on, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to be here with all of the great speakers and also the attendees. So I will try to divide this into two parts. One is how Erbil, especially the political side, the political parties, how they see Baghdad, and how Baghdad they see Kurdistan region. So I will also would like to just add one more thing, which was very important in the beginning when you mentioned Masroor Barzani's cabinet, when he made some bold promises, like a new steps that he will take. One of the things that he mentioned, and I was interested to see if this is true, was that he said he will fight for a reset with Baghdad. And he promised that he will see Baghdad as a strategic place. But I will be happy to answer that if anybody want to test that statement, and how much was that true in reality. And also we need to be careful with the words used by Masroor Barzani's campaign when they talk about strong Kurdistan, when they talk about reforms. So it has different meaning. It has different interpretations on their side and also on their media campaign. So with regard to relations with Baghdad, we have a fundamental issues with between Baghdad and Erbil, how they see each other. First of all, for the Kurdish the political parties who are participating or are decision makers in the KRG, they have to either see themselves as what has been stated in the constitution, which is a true partnership. They are part of this country. They are fighting as Iraq, as part of Iraq, and fighting together with the rest of Iraq for the interest of the Iraqi state, as it is something that they fought for, Barzanis and Talibanis. They forced people to vote for the Iraqi new constitution, because that's the only constitution in the history of Kurdish people in the Middle East to be seen as a more democratic and a true partnership or recognition of the Kurdish culture, language, and political status. So we need to invest this, and we need to fight for the right which has been mentioned in the constitution. But what we have seen in practice, especially after the extraction of oil, Erbil is seen to forget what is mentioned in the constitution. They pretend that they are a different country. They are the other Iraq, and they are not really, related or relevant to what is going on in Basra, in Mosul, in Najaf, in Anbar, and Baghdad. Although they are the true pillars, and one of the pillars of the Iraqi government and the new political system in Iraq since 2003. There has never been a government and a formation, or never been a very strategic decision making in Baghdad without the contribution of Erbil. Erbil means KRG, the decision makers of KRG, KDP and PUK. So but they don't act that way. So they don't even act that they have their people in Baghdad, that the president of Iraq is representing the whole Iraq, but it's a Kurdish leader. And they don't act that they are forming the government together. So they don't even give in the same privilege or the same respect Erbil is given to Tehran and to Ankara. They don't give the same respect they give even to Washington than to Baghdad. Baghdad is the last place to be consulted on by Erbil for anything. That sometimes they are not even consulted. They are not even respected. They are surprised that by steps KRG are taking. So this kind of controversial situation that we have in Kurdistan is you act as if you are not part of this country, but while you fought for something in the constitution and you always asking Iraq to respect constitution, it makes your position very weak. It doesn't give you a lot of power in Baghdad when you are asking for things, when you are asking for your share, when you're asking for your rights from the other components of Iraq. Also, it is very dangerous for Erbil playing this way, that they acknowledge the Arab supremacy of Iraq. Like Iraq is an Arab state. So while in constitution it is not like that, and that's not something in Baghdad is being promoted very strongly. There are some individual voices, but not it's not an overall majority politics in Baghdad. I will talk about the second section about Baghdad, how Baghdad sees Erbil. So Erbil, it's not only about the budget, it's not only about the oil, it's about the vision. Erbil doesn't see itself, Kurdistan region doesn't see itself as it fits in the Iraqi constitution. It doesn't see itself if it has the obligation and the responsibility in this country. And there are some tough responsibilities that you need to participate in, starting from security cooperation, not confrontation. Now we are in a confrontation security-wise, to economic partnership. So you contribute to the federal budget at the same time that you ask for your share from the federal budget. You are also need to foreign affairs. You need to have integrate your foreign affairs policies and aspiration within the Iraqi state, not having a parallel foreign affairs, sometimes against the Iraqi interest. So these are really issues Erbil has, and it is something that we see as Kurdish politician in Baghdad, and that's something that we feel it's not only Baghdad. So this is the problem Erbil has, the vision, how to handle, how to see itself, how to deal with Baghdad. It needs to reset its mindset and its vision with Iraq, with the rest of Iraq, and see itself as a part of Iraq, not something that wants to, as if Iraq doesn't exist. So if your policy is you want to separate from Iraq, that's something else. You tried, you failed. But still, your international recognition status is according to the Iraqi constitution. So invest in it and take this opportunity and try to strengthen your position and act as Iraqi. I will give you an example. We had a couple weeks ago, we had a meeting.
So that you will give some time to the, to the Iraqi side, how
I'm like transition to this.
But just, remember the time, because you don't have, we don't have time. Yeah.
I have 3 more minutes. So we had a meeting with a delegation formed by a temporary committee by Iraqi parliament to try settle down the crisis and the issues between misunderstanding or lack of agreement between Baghdad and Erbil. The committees, they came to meet with us, the G15, which is the 15 MPs outside of PUK and KDP camp in Baghdad. One of them, he mentioned something very interesting, and I will try from this transition to the Baghdad side. He said, don't become in Baghdad, in the parliament, don't become a Kurdish MP, so in order not to become an Arab MP. So to become an Iraqi, so in this, we have so much in common to do that. If you use your Kurdishness, and then I will use my Arabness. So the other side of the picture is Baghdad. It seems, especially when I'm talking about Baghdad, is the mid and south, the Shia blocks. They are still in the opposition mentality. They have problems on they are the majority and they are the ones that they should run the country. They still do not see themselves as that. That's the general issue about Iraq. But also they do not have any policy for Kurdistan. Their short-sighted policy is the budget sharing with KRG, and they only see KRG and PUK KDP policies. They want to handle the crisis, temporary solutions with KRG. They do not have a policy toward the Kurdish people, how to embrace them, how to understand them, how to communicate with them. Until recently, we helped some of the protesters, representation of the teachers and employees from Suleimania, to meet with the Iraqi leaders. That's the first time the regular people, regular Kurdish people from Kurdistan region going to Baghdad meet with the non-Kurdish politicians for matters related to their life. And they are even not informed about the Kurdish politics. The Arab sides of, especially our Shia friends, they are less informed. They do not really have much, they don't really pay attention too much to what's going on in Kurdistan. They have always been focusing on how to handle relations with Baghdad, with Erbil and KDP and PUK, and use them for government formation to appease the international community that this is inclusive government. Other than that, they do not have a policy toward Kurdistan. They do not know how to handle Kurdistan. They see it as a burden. They don't see it as something that is a very important part of the country. And they always have something in their mind that this part of the country one day, because this is also, we give them this impression, Erbil give them this impression that they will separate from Iraq. They don't consider themselves from Iraq. And I will give you one example, and that's the last point. The teachers and the employees from Sulli met with Ammar Hakim. Ammar Hakim, he asked them a very interesting question. He was very curious about that. He said, I have seen in a demonstration in Said Sada, in a recent demonstration, a young guy he raised Iraqi flag, and he was so happy about that. And he said, we have never seen something like that. We have never seen that the Kurdish people are, consider themselves as Iraqi. Is it true? Is it something that is happening now? So this is something that they are not informed. They don't have a policy for Kurdistan. They don't have a vision for how to deal with Kurdistan, how to integrate the Kurdistan with the rest of Iraq. It's more of a campaign strategy they have. Sometimes they have some anti-KRG rhetoric for elections, which is a very destructive sentiment. And I will end with this, and I will be happy to answer your questions after Seevan, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you, Serko. Yeah, of course. Later on, we come back to the question, especially so if there's a path to get rid of that, we have been in. So people are the victims of the conflicts, and it's not the KDP and PUK that are paying the price. The poor people of the Kurdistan region, and Baghdad has politicized the issues, and as you said, they see only the KDP and PUK. Whereas if they also consider Kurdistan region as a legitimate integrated part of the Kurdistan region, for example, many people ask why they are cutting the budget, why they are not using other means to resolve the issue to deal with the KDP and PUK, other than resorting to cut the budget of people. But as you know, since last year there have been some changes, especially with regard to the protests. I also want to hear a bit how the people, especially the protesters, the activists, how they are thinking about the Kurdistan region and the issues with between the conflicts and the disputes between the Kurdistan region and Baghdad, because it's not only about payment. It's like why we should not talk about the implementation of Article 140. So. Seevan Saeed. So he will talk about transnational Kurdish politics, the Kurdistan region versus the PKK rivalry, whether we can say that it's a conflict between the KDP or the PKK, or as some people want to mention, it's rather the PKK in Kurdistan region, and how the PKK has become a problem in the Kurdistan region. And coming to that, also we see Turkish presence in the Kurdistan region. There is a Turkish intervention in Sinjar, and they have so about 30 military bases. So as many of us know Seevan, and to better introduce to you, so Seevan is associate professor in the Middle East politics at Shanghai Normal University in China. He's originally from Kurdistan. He received his BA and MA degree in sociology at the University of Wolverhampton in the United Kingdom. And then he gained a PhD in the Middle East politics at the University of Exeter. And he delivered lectures in domestic and international universities. He published books, articles, and papers in 6 languages in the peer-reviewed international journals. So Seevan, mic is yours.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Very glad to hear you with beautiful presentation from 3 colleagues here. And thanks to the whole audience here. And today is 30th of December here, 2 a.m. in Beijing. I'm greeting you from Beijing, actually, and I think for you is evening still, wherever you are. And 29th of December. I would like to look at the impact of the regional politics, actually, and looking at the actors and proxies, and looking at the whole condition of Iraqi Kurdistan, and in a broader context slightly, and looking whether it's a challenge or opportunities. And under any circumstances, we can see both ways, whether challenge or opportunities. I would like to say, in order for understanding all the situation, we don't have to look as an isolated case of the internal issues in Kurdistan region at the moment. Like most of the state will try to look at all these problems and chaoses that happening in their own countries as an internal issues, and due to the legitimacy of the state, they don't want anybody else to interfere. But in case of Iraq and Syria or some failed state areas in the Middle East, actually, we no longer think of this kind of legitimacies, and under the name of humanitarian intervention or human rights intervention, so many things since the 90s, very beginning of 90s in the Afghanistan and Iraq, cases of humanitarian intervention is being something very in the main agenda. So in terms of Iraqi Kurdistan nowadays, we cannot look at this as isolated cases, and we have to look at the whole other stakeholders who are now acting in the area, whether they are state actors or non-state actors. I would like to say, in terms of the Kurdish question itself, the biggest obstacles or biggest dilemma so far we can see could be a fragmentation. And we can translate this word of fragmentation into the diversity and pluralism, which is a very positive and good things that Kurdish people and Kurdish political will could use this as a diversity and mosaic, and making a strong point for pursuing the politics in a better way. Or, and unfortunately in the Kurdish case, the fragmentation became a weakness and became something for losing confidence politically, socially, even psychologically, in terms of the Kurdish people as themselves and their political will as they are, some of them at the moment, acting. Another important point I would like to quickly say about it is, nowadays, whether we like it or not, slightly the whole lines of Kurdish political and social identity goes through 2 different pathways. Both ways are having more than one enemy to fear for, or more than one friend to having a rely on. And the 2 main things, very, very obvious for both of you, is KDP on one hand, and the agenda of the KDP and the view and perspective of what they want, and on the other hand is the PKK as a new. I was in one of my political, in one of my academic, actually, journal articles, I named them to as a new Kurds and traditional Kurds, which is very long, but briefly I would like to say them 2 different Kurds and them 2 different political identities that have so many aspects of shaping 2 different Kurds among themselves and for the people who they see them outside, make the cases very complicated for every single part of the activities under the name of Kurds within the country or outside. In this case, I would like to briefly say that both pathways having their own social, political, even diplomatic agendas, and they are imposing it on the main Kurdish arena. Of course, we have to accept that there are so many other sub-parties, sub-ideas, movements, etc. But whether we like it or not, we accept this argument or not, some of them are within the interest of them two mainstream politics that are running nowadays. In terms of Iraqi Kurdistan, whether we like it or not, PKK has a presence because PKK is pan-Kurdist, or Kurdistani is better to say, political and social will that is presenting and having an agenda for all the Middle East, and particularly for the areas that Kurdistan as a land are Kurdish people situated in. In this case, we cannot isolate the case of Iraqi Kurdistan without the presence of PKK, if it's not as a political party, of course, as an ideology and the perspective and the way that they are seeing the situation. On the other hand, KDP, while is a Kurdistan party, Iraqi Kurdistan party mainly, and is a name, or actually the formal name is Democratic Party of Kurdistan - Iraq, but they have a proxies in other three parts and they are having their own agendas. But the main important essential problems we can see, and actually division between the two, is that both main states, Iran and Turkey, which are considered as a main enemies, I mean, I'm talking about Turkish state and Iranian states, not the Turkish people and Iranian people per se. Of course, I understand that the majority of the people into these two countries are being educated in a way that we are the enemies, we are the obstacles in front of their own unity, etc. But as a state, them two states are main enemies for the Kurdish people and for the area that we call it Kurdistan. Interestingly, KDP, as one of the mainstream, main important part of the Kurdish politics, are always having a goodwill and good rely on them two enemies for oppressing the Kurdish people as a main target. So I can clearly say that KDP's main enemy are not Turkish state, no Iranian state, not even former Iraqi state, and no Syrian state. Of course, in the case of Iraq and Syria, now we have a different condition, and we can see that today is Baghdad as an enemy for the Kurds. This is a very big illusion if we say this, but very easily and clearly we can say Turkish state and Iranian state are two main enemies of the every Kurdish dream, agenda, and whatever the will and advance for the Kurdish people. But interestingly, KDP are very good friend with both of them, and actually the very active proxies for the two, very cleverly managing both agendas in Iraqi Kurdistan and doing the proxies for both of them. So many other smaller parties in terms of Iraqi Kurdistan, like KDP, like PUK or Goran, or even Islamic movements like Yagirtu or Komal, etc. They must be in a waiting list for years to be relied, to be trusted enough as KDP by both Iran and Turkey. So if one of them go to Iran, to Ankara or to Tehran to say, please, let's be your proxies, they say, wait, we have a better soldier than you. We have KDP. Please be in a waiting list or prove that you are good enough. On the other hand, we can see clearly PKK declaring the whole war against the Turkish state from the first day until now. And for some political reason, I would like to say, there's a softer war between PKK and Iran due to the geopolitical conditions. That this is just something that we can call it politics nowadays. And both KDP and PKK are very well understood that the politics cannot be pursued based on nothing or everything. So they are managing this, and somehow we can call them as a kingmaker among all these big things, while they are actually, especially in the case of KDP, they are proxies. So in this case, we have to look at the condition of Iraqi Kurdistan based on these two hegemonic powers. One of them, KDP, that wants the status quo as it is for the sake of its particular tribal or even political, if in a best case say, interest. They have to do any compromise to the Iranian and Turkish and all other actors for the sake of their own interest. On the other hand, PKK wants to create a new, different type of Kurdishness, different type of struggle that we can see now and then in terms of any difficulties for Iraqi Kurdistan, like what we see in 2014 when ISIS came, and what's going on with Shangal, and even nowadays what is going on in terms of mobilizing and creating new different Kurds that we call the educational process. These are very big complications for the way of mentality of Iraqi Kurdistan, how they understand PKK. At the moment, I would like to focus on two particular points, whether challenges or opportunity. We have an example of 2015 when PKK came into the towns in Turkey, in 7 Kurdish cities, and they were thinking of making the third wave of their own agenda for what we call it in Kurdish, Shari Gali Shorjeri. I mean, the whole mass mobilization of the revolution against the state and declaring the revolution as a whole mass. This one was failed somehow. So PKK cannot and doesn't want to directly interfere into Iraqi Kurdistan's issue nowadays. However, whether we like it or not, whether PKK likes it or not, is a very big, important agenda for the majority of the Kurdish people who they see guerrilla or Sharvan, like YPG or PKK, HPG, as a goodwill and as a good for the Kurdish people, no matter they're in Iraq or in Syria or in Turkey or whatever. So it might be from the next phase when the protests will remain again, whether we like it or not, whether PKK themselves will interfere or not, it will be very much affect in terms of making better face or maybe more active face in terms of the uprising against the current KRG with the leadership of KDP, because the KDP is in a cul-de-sac nowadays. We cannot imagine this all corruption with all this tyranny that happened to the Kurdish people by themselves, by those who they were having a hope to sort the Kurdish and better future for the Kurds. But KDP made a very, very horrible with all actually with alliance of KDP with PUK mainly and others. We cannot see any U-turn or any kind of reform anymore. We have to look for the next phase of the protest, next phase of actually revolution, whether we like it or not. And in that case, the agenda of PKK, the way of perspective of PKK can be very much active in the next phase. That's what I can see. And on the other hand, as I said, first minute, isolation is not something that the case. The relation between Erbil and Baghdad, on one hand, must be rectified, but not through the way of KDP wants, and it doesn't go anymore. If you look at the 15 guys who they are member of parliament, one of them, Mr. Sarkam Shamsaddin, are mainly 10 times more active than other 45 Kurdish members belong to KDP and PUK, because they are definitely dedicated for doing something different from what is happening for last at least 17 years since 2003. What I'm trying to say as a last sentence, we have to look at the very near future and waiting for new, more, what they call it chaos or whatever, but I can call it protest or even revolution, that we have to all be ready for it in a very near future in Iraqi Kurdistan or in Kurdistan region. Thank you very much for being patient to listen to me from Beijing.
Thanks a lot, Seevan, and thanks for staying up to late night with us and for the very to the point analysis. And so before getting to the now we go to the QA session, and please let me know or just raise your virtual hands and I will see if you want to comment or to raise a question. So thus far there's one question from Araz, which is for Sarkam Shamsaddin, who wants to know how can we find a common language, ordinary people language, not political language, that associate both Kurdistan and Baghdad issues. So, Sarkam, please, I think it is also in the, no, sorry, it's not in the public chat session. But so I think you heard my question, and please, try to as short as possible to answer the questions. Yeah, Sarkam. Yeah. I think Sarkam is, so he's not here. So I'll go to Renwar. Renwar, so you were in the Kurdistan region during the, protests.
Sarkam just came back. He was out of the room.
Okay, so after that you answer that question, then he can answer. He pick up the question. So Renwar, you were one of the journalists who were covering the protests, and we saw a lot of like from international organizations and lots of diplomats, including the United States from Pompeo, so they raised the question. They raised their concerns about how the KRG and the KDP and PUK forces are dealing with the media and protesters. Could you provide us with more information how the KDP and PUK are dealing with the media and how the protesters, how many have been killed and whether they are still in the prison or not?
So I think the state of freedom of expression and freedom of media is quite clear for all now. It was clear for the people, for the local people in Kurdistan. However, some from outside Kurdistan or even the pro KDP or PUKs would argue that there are some, for example, a margin of freedom of expression here and there, or especially the pro-PUK journalists or activists claim that to have a better situation of freedom of media and expression in the PUK zone of influence. However, from the December protests, all these claims have been abolished, and it only depends on the situation to see PUK act exactly the same at the KDP. For example, covering protests in Soleimani, Halab, Jarrani, and other PUK-controlled areas were absolutely banned, and we saw the opposition media outlets were shut. We saw many journalists were imprisoned, were harassed, I do believe that there is no let's say there is no any different mindset between the PUK and the KDP in terms of believing in freedom of expression. And your other question about the activists and journalists who are still being held behind the bars, we have like up to 15 journalists and activists are still being held in the KDP prisons. Some of them are very known people. For example, Sherwan Sherwani and Badal Barwari and others. Despite all the pressures from the internal pressures from the NGOs, from the media, from the activists, and despite the pressures from the outside, from the Amnesty International, from the Human Rights Watch, from the CPJ, even after the Mike Pompeo's call with the PM Masroor Barzani, still they are in jail, and I think it's a strategic path. Masroor Barzani's strategic path is to keep them behind the bars, despite all the pressures.
Yeah. Thank you, Renwar. And Dastan, I see you have already raised your hand, but there's also a question for you from Win Rogers, and he says, You talked about very few people seem to understand what the young people who are protesting are thinking. How do you actually go out and figure that out? What kind of methods do you suggest? Yeah, Mike, it's yours.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's what we want to find out. Well, the point is, there has been a lot of discussion, for example, over the last years, pretty much, about the new census for Iraq. And I think that's absolutely important. That's absolutely a priority. We still don't know how many inhabitants we have exactly. We have no idea about demographics. We have no idea about median income. We have no idea about this stuff. And it's quite frankly, it's really amazing me how, and we have to say both sides, both Iraq and the Kurdistan region have the money to engage some of the biggest companies like KPMG or PricewaterhouseCoopers or all of these big companies and pay them for millions to make reports on their oil exports and to whitewash their exports. And I emphasize both sides. They have money for that, but they don't have money for polling. It doesn't work like that. We need to have active polling. And actually, a part of the critique in my book chapter is that the international survey organizations and the international surveys that are doing surveys in Iraq, for example, they are grossly underrepresenting Kurdish people. They're grossly underrepresenting rural people. They're grossly underrepresenting people that are from the lower class that cannot be, reached that easily. So I think, yes, it's a big, big issue about how we're going to have institutions that are able to do stuff like polling and that are able to, build up a connection with that. And I mean, we have seen an example of an article that was published, which was about what the Kurdish people want, which was ironically written by a white woman that worked for TRT before. And she is writing something about what Kurdish people want and not. And I am a Kurdish person, but I'm sitting in Germany. I would never have the audacity to say, oh, well, I know everything about the young people there. So I'm wondering, how can we even be in a situation where stuff like that is legitimized, where we don't even have the survey polling to make these big accusations and big assumptions?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dastan. And yeah, Sarah Glean, yeah, you want to say something, your comment or your question? Mike is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, yes. Realizing, of course, that, yeah, it's really difficult to know what in a big way, what people think, but obviously, we must be able to hear a certain amount what is being said, what's being discussed without, being able to put statistics to it. And I was wondering how much in the debates, in the discussions between people or even in protests, links are made to those bigger political points that Seevan was talking about, and particularly to the Shangol agreement and to Turkey's increasing encroachment in Iraq. And also if there are links with the protests that have been taking place before in Baghdad, Dastan has looked at both Kurdish and Iraqi youth. So I was wondering what her comparisons were there as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So yeah, Dastan or Seevan, whoever wants to pick up the question. Yeah, Dastan, would you like to?
Okay, so well, it's interesting. It's a big question, or like the big geopolitical stuff that we're reading. Is this something that people are talking about, or is it like just the more imminent stuff that people are engaging with? But again, I argue pretty much in favor for a view where I mean, I know no area pretty much in the world where people are so focused on news like the Middle East. Like, I mean, there is no household that is not almost 24/7 watching news. And I think with the young people, it's more and more like that. I think many people are extremely sophisticatedly aware of the situation. And if people criticize their own situation in the system, and they look at the news and they see the situation, they might not immediately be like, oh, hey, you know, I did not get I wasn't able to pay my rent this month because, you know, there's a Baghdad-Erbil agreement on Sinjar. No, they wouldn't say that. But I mean, overall, if they analyze their situation, if they look at the framework in which their oppression is taking place, then of course they're looking at geopolitics, and of course they're looking at the situation. I have to say, you know, this image that is portrayed sometimes that, you know, like Sarkam said it, you know, in Baghdad, we have like some democratic utopia that is waiting for the Kurdish people to come there. It's not true. Baghdad is under de facto rule of Tehran. And you cannot say that this is something that where the Kurdish people can just come in. So the issue is people are aware that they are under imminent threat of Turkey, for example, and Turkish airstrikes for many years now. And Baghdad is also allowing this. So I think people are really aware of that. And when it comes to the comparison between both sides, yes, and Kamal said it already, it's the periphery that is doing a lot. And that's really interesting to look at. And we're having more and more a sphere of places that are not really urban, that are not really rural, where stuff is happening. I mean, we also have to consider that more and more IDPs are trying to go back and to live in a normal setting again, but they often don't have the means to directly go back into the city. So many of these IDPs actually settle in these in-between areas. So I think this is really, and I mean, a lot of them are also young people that were born after 2000. So I think when looking at the comparison, I think I would say this is the biggest similarity between both of them, that this is a lot going on in the periphery. But yet again, and there was talk about the same language between the Kurdish and Arab people and stuff like that. That's a big problem, you know. A lot of people don't speak the same language, and they might have the same goals, and a lot of them have the same goals and same grievances, but there is not a possibility to have the spaces and the language to work together. And that has something to do with the political parties, of course, and it is the point of Marja'iyya. You know, Marja'iyya system has this goal. It has the goal that we have a whole generation that is not talking to each other, but it also has the goal that this is not created, that these spaces are not created. And that's the sad thing about it, really.
Yeah, thanks, Dastan. And so, Seevan, there is one question for you from Sultan Bradosti, who says, do you think PKK have a specific agenda for the Kurdistan region of Iraq? Yeah, could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you for unmuting me. Thanks for the question. Actually, partially with Sarah's question as well. I think Renwar answered the question of Sarah somehow in the very beginning, that says, while now apparently we see the economic demands for those people who are protesting and on the street, but there are so many other things, and the result will be, the anger and all these, one of the reasons will lead into all other things as well. But there's one obstacles in the particular areas of protest now. People are labeled as their babies. They don't know anything, and they don't know who going to be their leaders. And whoever wants to take the lead, they're just going to be actually is by KDP and PUK. They do the same. They are trying to accuse them that they are trying to make for future phase to get in their own parliamentary seats and whatever the benefit for this protest happening. So there's some kind of trends that everybody is not trusted anymore, those guys who they are trying to make the lead, and the young people don't know exactly how to manage this, although we have to leave them alone, but that's not an easy case. In this case, I think in the next phase of the protest, Sarah, we can see that so many of these demands that are now not very much hot in the agenda, and we cannot see them daily, they will come even to the way that one day we will hear them majority of the Iraqi Kurdistan people and even Iraq as well to say, irhal, go, please go, we don't need you anymore. No longer waiting for reform or salary or whatever. In terms of the answer for the Mr. Bradosti, actually, yes, PKK has an agenda for whole Kurdistan. For PKK, Kurdistan is one Kurdistan with different practices, and the politics is different from the feeling and ideology for making the freedom and liberation for the Kurdish people, no matter where they are. However, at the very moment, PKK always thinking of opening the opportunities and doors for the struggle in a best way based on the political opportunities, while always for the last 40 years they were accused that they are doing something against the political opportunities and rational choice. But the rational choice at the moment not to open another new hot areas and to fight some rivalry with those people who at least, let alone the agenda is very dirty. I would like to clearly say here from Beijing, Seevan Saeed says that the KDP's agenda is very dirty and is against the Kurdish people and against the Kurdish awakening to be liberated one day for a long time. But if PKK interfere into some real fight, it will be labeled as a brother fight site or Shari Kuji, the fight between brothers, which is not a right one. These two different agendas by KDP and PKK will go parallel because of few important things. One is about international will. International will doesn't let any of these two wills to go fully diminished, or one of them have a victory in order for continue this kind of game, no matter dirty game or not. Another way, PKK wants to educate people and wake them up somehow to not longer be deceived by this kind of rhetoric that often KDP with the agendas of Turkey mainly is putting into the Kurdish street, that we are having a referendum, we are having a Kurdish state. PKK doesn't want a Kurdish state, put the Kurdishness and Kurdish state into the bin, whatever, all these kind of rhetoric. PKK has to wait and work hard in order for awakening people rather than putting themselves into the way of fighting and kind of dirty or maybe not useful way of fighting, which is not benefiting the Kurds, benefiting the agenda as well. Therefore, I don't see we have to expect the direct interfere for the PKKs, but ideologically is already interfere. Ideologically, majority of the Kurdish people at the moment who are angry of KDP and PUK are somehow adapting the idea of freedom that is being brought from Shangal, from Rojava, from Kandil Mountain. These kind of ideas and ideologies slightly is growing up into the Iraqi Kurdistan as well, whether we like it or not.
Thanks a lot, Seevan. So one last question to Sarkam. I don't know whether Sarkam has re-entered the room or not. So from Aras, who says, how can we find a common language, ordinary people language, not political language, that associates both Kurdistan and Baghdad issues? Sarkam?
Unmute me. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good question. That's something I think we need to work on that. There's already common interest and common goals from Basra all the way to Zaho. People are asking for prosperity and liberty, like freedom. They are both people in the rest of Iraq and Kurdistan region are struggling from the same types of politicians, the same type of mafia and militia rules. To some extent in Kurdistan, it's more organized. In the rest of Iraq, maybe it's still not organized, but it is kind of it's the same system, same people, same elite who are taking actually still their future. But two things need to happen. First, maybe the language is the temporary barrier, but not the main barrier. But the other thing is we need to start the civil society organization in both sides need to work together in order to unify the efforts. In order to, in the last demonstrations in Baghdad, so many people, thousands of people in Kurdistan naturally, they sympathized with the Baghdad and they were on social media promoting their cause and they were sharing their stories and their goals. And also when happened in Suleimania also a couple of weeks ago, the same thing happened in the rest of Iraq. Of course, in the Suleimania demonstration were very short. It ended quickly, but people were sympathetic. And I have been talking to young people on daily basis, demonstrators and regular people, also in the TV shows and outside of TV shows, that they have, like I mentioned, the barrier of the language. They're not to be able to directly communicate with the Kurdish people, Kurdish young people, but also the lack of the channels by the civil society, building channels with the rest of Iraq, that made a huge gap between the both sides in order to work together to achieve the goals that they have. But I see that there is a more growing, it's not majority, but it's growing number of people, young people in the rest of Iraq, that they are learning more about the Kurdistan situation, internal political issues, and the corruption, because their politicians, they framed Kurdistan as being built as a Switzerland based on the oil from Basra, and they are been taking our oil, our money, building their Switzerland. Also, they are sympathetic with Israel, like stuff like that. Like our politicians are using the same thing, that Baghdad is against us, Baghdad is our enemy. So there will not be enough like a channel to see the real picture until the last few years, especially the IDP helped in a way of more people from the rest of Iraq to come to Kurdistan, to live there, building more relations. But it is a very long road, and it will take more time to build the bridge between two sides.
Yeah, thanks, Sarkam. Although I had said that that would be the last question, but I have received two questions. So one is, both questions I think Dastan can answer. One is specifically for her, which is about. So Ban Hushar says, aside from the issues between KNRG and the federal government, how can the youth of the KNRI make changes in the government? It seems to me that there's no peaceful road of any systematic change to happen. So this is the first question. I think it's for Dastan, and also Dastan, there is another question from Katya. So asking about if there is a little time like to answer whether regarding the women's participation in the December 2020 Kurdistan region protests, as well as in comparison with the previous protest waves. So Dastan, the last words will be for you. Please, as short as you can. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, if I would know how the system in Kurdistan would change, then I would have done it, and I wouldn't be living in Germany, and my parents wouldn't have come here, and I wouldn't, I wish I knew. I have no idea. And the only thing that I'm hoping for right now is that all of the people that were detained that we know about, and Renwar talked about the people that we know about, there's a dark number of people that we don't even know about, if they were abandoned, what is going on with them. I talked to Renwar and Kamal today, for example, about this social media influencer, Mazen Jamila, who was also just disappeared for 3 days, and no one who knows where he is. So for me, the bar is really low right now. The bar is really at, I hope that no more people get killed, and I hope that no more people get abducted. That's like the bar that we are at right now. When it comes to change, there might be some more revolutionary thinkers that know more about that. And when it comes to women's participation, well, the thing is, I mean, actually, one interesting thing that I found out in my analysis, which was based on the data that I talked about before, which is, it's not too much, but you can work with it. One of the things that I found out is that gender really has the biggest influence when it comes to civic attitudes, when it comes to political attitudes, and especially when it comes to pro-democracy attitudes. And it's going to be more and more important, because it's especially women that are the majority who are employed in the private sector, and that have to face a lot of economic instability and problems like that. But when it comes to the participation and the protest directly, I have seen female participation, especially in Slemani, but especially in the outskirts, it's not really something usual, and it's quite dangerous, you know. I mean, like, as a woman, that's the situation. Like, you're oppressed by economic system, you're oppressed by patriarchy, you know. You have to kind of watch out for yourself. So a lot of women have to be very careful where they're going to protest. But yeah, there have been more women participating, and hopefully there will be more room for women to participate in such protests.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dastan, for answering the questions, and thanks a lot for your participation. Dastan from Germany, Seevan from China, Renwar and Sarkam from Slemani, Kurdistan. So, and thanks for all the participants who were very much patient to listen to us and to the speakers. One last thing I can say is, despite the fact that there are a lot of crises, but we have gone through much worse, and people have always been resilient. And I think with the new generation, be in Baghdad or in Kurdistan or in Slemani or in Erbil, you know, the political system cannot get rid of, you know, just cannot continue the status quo. No matter what, there should be some changes, and there should be some real reforms. Otherwise, you know, it will not continue as such. So once again, thanks a lot for all, and enjoy your evening, and Happy New Year, and see you next time.